The Northern Star was 3 days from Earth when the distress signal came through. Captain Laura Bishop stood at the bridge window, watching the endless darkness of space stretch before her. The signal was weak, broken, desperate. A science vessel was dying somewhere in the neutral zone between human and alien territory. "Should we respond?" asked from the communications console. He was young, barely 25, with the kind of eagerness that came from inexperience. "Protocol says we should report it and continue our route." Laura knew the protocol. She also knew that protocol would not save the lives of whoever was trapped on that dying ship. "Set a course," she said. "We are going to help them." The Northern Star was a cargo vessel, not a rescue ship. It carried medical supplies, machine parts, and food to colonies on the outer rim. The crew was small: Laura as captain, on communications, Myra Santos as the ship medic, and Daniel Cole handling cargo operations. They were not heroes. They were workers doing a job, but Laura had spent enough years in space to know that sometimes the job meant doing more than what was written in the manual. Daniel Cole appeared on the bridge as they changed course. He was a quiet man in his 40s with gray at his temples and eyes that noticed everything. Before joining the merchant fleet, he had served in military intelligence. He never talked about those years, but Laura had seen his file. He was the kind of man who survived situations that killed others. "Vessel?" Daniel asked, studying the navigation display. "Science ship," confirmed. "They say their engines failed and life support is failing." Daniel nodded slowly. His expression revealed nothing, but Laura noticed the way his fingers tapped against the console. He was thinking, calculating, looking for something wrong. That was what intelligence officers did. They found the traps before the traps found them. The ship hung dead in space when they arrived. It was a small vessel, built for research rather than combat. Lights flickered along its hull. Escape pods remained attached, unused. Either the crew could not reach them or they had chosen not to leave. Laura led the rescue team herself. Daniel insisted on coming along. Myra brought medical supplies. They crossed the gap between ships in pressure suits, entering through an emergency airlock that managed to open remotely. Inside, the ship was cold and dark. Emergency lighting cast red shadows on the walls. There were tall beings with blue-gray skin and large eyes adapted for low light. They found 6 of them huddled in the main laboratory, wrapped in thermal blankets and breathing from portable oxygen tanks. "Thank you," the lead scientist said in broken English. "We thought we would die here." Laura organized the evacuation. Myra checked the scientists for injuries. Daniel helped move equipment and supplies. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed like a simple rescue mission. Then Daniel disappeared. One moment he was carrying a container of research samples toward the airlock. The next moment he was gone. No sound, no warning, no sign of struggle, just an empty corridor where a man had been standing. "Daniel," Laura called out, her voice echoed through the dead ship. Daniel responded. Silence. They searched the ship for an hour. They found his broken communicator in a storage room. They found a small pool of blood on the floor. They found nothing else. The scientists claimed they saw nothing. They claimed they heard nothing. But Laura noticed how they avoided eye contact. She noticed how their hands trembled when she asked questions. They were hiding something. "Tell me what happened," Laura demanded. "Tell me where my crewman is." "We do not know," the lead scientist insisted. "We were in the laboratory, we saw nothing." But one scientist was older than the others, ancient by standards. He had not spoken since the rescue began. Now he reached out and grabbed Laura's arm with surprising strength. His eyes were wide with terror. "Harvester," he whispered, then he collapsed. Myra rushed to help him, but the old scientist had fallen unconscious. His vital signs were stable, but he would not wake. Whatever he had seen, whatever he knew, was locked inside his sleeping mind. Laura made a decision. She could continue the cargo run and report Daniel's disappearance to Earth Command. She could follow protocol. She could abandon her crewman to whatever had taken him, or she could search. She said when they returned to the Northern Star, "Send a message to Earth Command. Report everything that happened. Ask them what a harvester is." "Captain," said carefully, "if we leave our route to search for Daniel, we will miss our delivery window. The company will not be happy." "The company can find another captain," Laura replied. "We are not leaving Daniel behind." The scientists were confined to quarters. They would be transferred to an outpost when possible. Until then, they would answer questions, whether they wanted to or not. Myra spent hours trying to wake the old scientist. Nothing worked. Whatever had caused his collapse was beyond her medical knowledge. All she could do was keep him stable and wait. Worked through the night, analyzing the distress signal that had brought them to the ship. He ran it through every filter and comparison program the Northern Star possessed. By morning, he had found something that changed everything. "Captain," he said, his face pale, "the distress signal was fake." Laura stared at him. Fake. It was not generated by the ship. It was generated from inside their own vessel, deliberately designed to attract passing ships. Swallowed hard. The whole thing was a trap, and Daniel was the target. Laura looked at the stars through the bridge window. Somewhere out there, Daniel Cole was a prisoner of something called a harvester, something that set traps and took people without sound or warning, something that the knew about and feared. She did not know what a harvester was. She did not know where to find one. She did not know if Daniel was still alive, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was going to find out. The Northern Star turned away from its planned route and headed into uncharted space. Behind them, the ship drifted empty and cold. Ahead of them lay questions without answers and darkness without end. And somewhere in that darkness, Daniel Cole opened his eyes and found himself in a white room with no doors, no windows, and no hope of escape. He did not know where he was. He did not know who had taken him, but he knew that he was not going to die without a fight. He was human, and humans did not give up. Daniel Cole sat in the center of the white room and waited. The walls glowed with soft light that had no source. The floor was smooth and warm. The air smelled clean, almost too clean, like a hospital that had been scrubbed until nothing living remained. He had been awake for hours, maybe days. Time was impossible to measure in a room with no windows and no changes. He had searched every surface for a door, a crack, anything that might show how he had entered. He found nothing. The room was a perfect box with no way in and no way out. Then the wall opened. It did not slide or swing like a normal door. It simply became an opening, as if the solid material had turned to air. Through the opening stepped two creatures unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. They were tall and thin, with gray skin that seemed to absorb the light around them. Their eyes were completely black, like pools of oil set into narrow faces. They wore no clothing, needed none. Their bodies moved with mechanical precision, each gesture exact and purposeful. They did not speak, not a single word. They communicated through symbols projected onto the walls, geometric patterns that meant nothing to Daniel. When he did not respond, they simply waited, patient, silent, eternal. Daniel called them the Silent Ones in his mind. It seemed to fit. They led him through corridors that all looked the same. White walls, soft light, no features. Other prisoners watched from cells identical to his own. Daniel recognized them from the rescue mission. He saw other species he could not name. Small beings with scales, large beings with multiple arms, creatures that seemed made of living stone. All of them shared the same expression, hopelessness. The Silent Ones brought Daniel to a larger chamber filled with medical equipment. They gestured for him to lie on a table. When he refused, they simply waited. No threats, no force, just endless patience. Daniel understood. They had all the time in the universe. He did not. He lay on the table. The tests began. They scanned his body with lights that tingled against his skin. They drew blood with needles that appeared from the table itself. They projected images into his eyes and measured his reactions. Through it all, they remained silent. They took notes in their strange symbols. They studied him like a scientist studies a new insect. After the tests, they returned him to his cell. The wall became solid behind him. He was alone again. But not for long. A voice came from the wall to his left. It was weak, tired, but speaking a language Daniel recognized. "Human," the voice said, "you are the new one." Daniel moved closer to the wall. "Who are you?" "My name is, I have been here for 9 years. At least I think it is 9 years. Time is difficult to measure." 9 years. Daniel felt cold despite the warmth of the room. What is this place? Who are these creatures? His laugh was bitter. "We call them the Collectors. They have many names across the galaxy. Some call them Harvesters. They take specimens from every species they find. They study us, test us, learn everything about our bodies and minds." "Why?" "No one knows. They never speak. They never explain. They simply take and study and wait." Paused. "Most specimens eventually disappear. They are taken from their cells and never return. We do not know where they go. We do not know what happens to them. We only know that they are gone. Daniel pressed his hand against the wall. There has to be a way out. Many have tried, none have succeeded. The collectors are ancient and powerful. Their technology is beyond anything we understand. His voice dropped lower. But you are different. I have watched the others. I have seen how they react to the collectors. Fear, despair, surrender. You showed none of these things. I was trained not to. There is more than training in your eyes. There is something the collectors do not expect. Hesitated. When you looked at them directly, they became uncomfortable. I have never seen them react that way to any species. Daniel remembered the moment. He had stared into those black eyes without flinching. The silent ones had looked away first. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy, Captain Laura Bishop received a response from Earth Command. The message was marked classified, restricted to senior officers only, and Myra watched as she read it on her private terminal. The word harvester appeared in exactly 3 intelligence reports over the past 100 years. Each report described the same pattern: individuals taken without trace from ships in neutral space. No bodies recovered. No ransom demands. No communication of any kind. The intelligence community believed the harvesters were a myth, a story told by spacers to explain disappearances that had no explanation. But Laura knew Daniel Cole was not a myth. His blood on that ship was not a myth. Something had taken him, and that something had a name. Called her to the cargo hold. He had searched through the belongings of the scientists, looking for anything unusual. He found a data crystal hidden in the personal effects of the lead scientist. "This is what I recovered from it," said, projecting the contents onto a screen. Laura's blood turned to ice. The crystal contained detailed biological scans of Daniel Cole. His height, weight, blood type, neural patterns, everything that made him who he was. The scans were dated 3 weeks before the rescue mission. Someone had been watching Daniel for a long time. Someone had chosen him specifically. The fake distress signal, the trapped ship, all of it was designed to capture one man. "Why him?" Myra asked. "Why Daniel?" Laura did not have an answer, but she intended to find one. Back in his cell, Daniel made a discovery of his own. The wall behind his sleeping platform was not as smooth as it appeared. Scratches covered the surface, hidden in the soft glow of the room. Names. Hundreds of names written in dozens of languages and scripts. The final entries were at the bottom of the wall, carved deep into the material. They were written in English. 3 names, 3 humans who had been held in this cell before him. Daniel traced the letters with his fingers. He did not know these people. He did not know their stories or their fates, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was not the first human taken by the Silent Ones, and if he did not find a way to escape, he would not be the last. Below the names, something else was scratched into the wall. It was not English. It was not any language Daniel recognized, but the symbols matched the ones he had seen the Silent Ones use. He memorized every mark. Whatever this message meant, it was important enough for someone to carve into the wall of their prison. It was a clue left behind by someone who came before. Daniel Cole had spent his career finding patterns in chaos. He had survived by noticing what others missed. Now he had something to work with. The Silent Ones had made a mistake. They had given him a puzzle. And humans were very good at solving puzzles. The tests continued for weeks. Every day, the Silent Ones came for Daniel. Every day, they measured and scanned and studied. Every day, he learned something new about his captors. They were creatures of absolute order. Their movements followed patterns, precise schedules that never changed. They arrived at the same time. They performed the same procedures in the same sequence. They returned him to his cell at the same moment. Daniel began to disrupt these patterns. On the 5th week, he refused to cooperate with a test. He simply sat on the examination table and would not move. The Silent Ones did not force him. They waited for hours, their black eyes watching without expression. When Daniel finally allowed the test to continue, they seemed confused. Their symbols flickered rapidly across the walls, as if they were arguing among themselves. On the 6th week, Daniel cooperated perfectly for 3 days, then refused again without warning. The Silent Ones could not predict when he would comply and when he would resist. This randomness disturbed them deeply. "Notice the change through the wall. What are you doing to them?" he asked one night. "Testing them," Daniel replied, "learning their weaknesses." "They have no weaknesses. They have existed for thousands of years. Everything has a weakness, you just have to find it. Through their conversations, Daniel learned more about the facility. It was built inside a massive asteroid, hidden in a field of rocks that drifted through unclaimed space. The Silent Ones had hundreds of specimens from dozens of species they had been collecting for. Also explained why humans were special. Your neural pathways are unlike anything else in the galaxy, he said. Most species think in straight lines. Logic follows logic, but humans think in spirals and branches and loops. You make connections that should not exist. You see patterns where there are none and create patterns where others see chaos. Daniel understood. The Silent Ones wanted to study human creativity, human unpredictability. They wanted to understand how humans thought so differently from every other species. That was why they could not handle his random behavior. They had never encountered a mind that refused to follow patterns on purpose. Far from the asteroid field, Captain Laura Bishop met an unexpected ally. A warship intercepted the Northern Star on the edge of unknown space. Laura prepared for a fight, but the commander requested a private meeting instead. Commander was old for his species. His blue-gray skin faded to pale silver. He came aboard the Northern Star alone, unarmed, carrying only a data tablet and decades of grief. 30 years ago, he said, sitting across from Laura in her quarters, my daughter was taken. She was a scientist, brilliant and curious, traveling through neutral space on a research mission. One day her ship sent a distress signal. By the time rescue arrived, she was gone. No trace, no explanation, just silence. Laura felt the weight of his pain. The harvesters. Yes, I have spent my life gathering information about them. The government denies their existence. They say it causes panic, damages trade, frightens the population. But I know the truth. He placed the tablet on the table. Everything I have learned is here. The data was extensive. Patterns, locations where disappearances clustered, and a name that appeared in ancient texts. Said, that is what our ancestors called them. They were an advanced civilization that rose and fell before most species learned to make fire. They achieved immortality through technology that transferred their consciousness from body to body. But immortality came with a price. They lost the ability to change, to grow, to create new ideas. They became frozen in time, their civilization dying slowly over. So they take specimens to study other species, Laura said, to find what they lost. Yes, and they are led by a single being, the oldest of their kind, a creature that has existed for over 12,000 years. His voice dropped to a whisper. We call it the Reaper. Laura leaned forward. How do we stop it? They have one weakness. It is built into their culture, their very existence. They are bound by ancient laws that cannot be broken. Pulled up an image on the tablet. It showed a stone monument covered in strange symbols. If you speak the Reaper's true name in its presence, it must answer truthfully to any question you ask. This is their oldest law. Even the Reaper cannot break it. What is its name? Closed his eyes. That is the problem. No one knows. The name has been lost for thousands of years. Every species that discovered it was destroyed or absorbed by the secret died with them. Laura stared at the monument image. The symbols meant nothing to her, but something about them seemed familiar. Back in the facility, Daniel made his breakthrough. He had been studying the symbols scratched beneath the human names on his cell wall, had helped him understand some of them, though even the could not read the ancient script. This phrase, Daniel said, tracing the marks, what does it mean? Was quiet for a long moment. It is very old, a title, I think. It translates roughly as the one who counts the dead. The one who counts the dead. A title for someone who kept track of every life taken, every specimen collected, every death that occurred in this facility over thousands of years. A title for the Reaper. Daniel pressed his palm against the symbols. Whoever had carved this message understood something important. They were bound by their true names. If this title could be traced back to its source, the original name might be found. But where would such records exist? The answer came to Daniel slowly. The Silent Ones documented everything. Every test, every specimen, every moment of their eternal existence was recorded and stored somewhere in this facility. If the Reaper had a name, it would be in those records. He needed to find the archives. The next time the Silent Ones came for testing, Daniel cooperated fully. He answered every question, completed every task, showed no resistance. The Silent Ones seemed pleased. their symbols flowing smoothly across the walls. When the tests ended, Daniel stumbled and fell against one of his captors. It was a calculated move, designed to look like exhaustion. In that brief moment of contact, he felt something in the creature's robe. A small device, smooth and warm. An access key. He palmed it without being noticed. Years of intelligence training had taught him how to steal without detection. The Silent Ones were brilliant scientists, but they were not prepared for a human spy. That night Daniel told what he had found. He was terrified but also hopeful. If you reach the archives, said, you might find more than a name. You might find a way to destroy this place. I intend to find both, Daniel replied. He waited until the facility's activity patterns reached their lowest point. Then he pressed the stolen key against his cell wall. The material rippled and opened. Daniel Cole stepped into the corridor. He was still a prisoner. He was still surrounded by enemies. He was still trapped inside an asteroid with no ship and no allies. But he had a mission now. Find the archives, find the name, find a way to make the Reaper answer for every life it had stolen. The hunt had begun. Daniel moved through the facility like a ghost. The corridors were identical, endless white passages that seemed designed to confuse anyone who wandered them. But Daniel had spent weeks memorizing the patterns of his captors. He knew their schedules, their routes, the gaps in their patrols. The Silent Ones passed him twice. Both times he pressed himself into shallow alcoves and held his breath. Their black eyes scanned the corridor without seeing him. They were looking for movement, for sound, for anything that broke their expected patterns. A motionless human in shadow was invisible to them. The archive was deep in the facility's core. Daniel found it by following power conduits that ran along the ceiling. The Silent Ones needed vast amounts of energy for their preservation technology. That energy had to flow somewhere. The archive chamber was enormous. It stretched upward into darkness, filled with glowing columns that contained data beyond human comprehension. Specimens floated in preservation tanks along the walls, beings from species that had been extinct for. The Silent Ones had been collecting long before humans existed. Daniel searched for hours. The data systems were designed for minds, not human ones. But he noticed something. The oldest records were stored differently than the newer ones. They used physical monuments rather than digital storage. Stone tablets carved with the same symbols he had seen in his cell. He found the monument he was looking for near the center of the chamber. It was ancient beyond measure, its surface worn smooth by countless years. But the symbols remained clear, carved deep into the stone. The monument was a memorial. It listed the names of the original, the founders of this dying civilization. Most of the names were forgotten, their meanings lost to time. But one name stood alone at the top, larger than the others. L. Daniel spoke the name aloud, testing its weight on his tongue. This was the Reaper. This was the one who had ordered his capture, who had stolen thousands of lives across thousands of years. This was the one who counted the dead. And now Daniel knew its name. A voice spoke behind him, fascinating. Daniel spun around. A figure stood in the archive entrance, tall and terrible, wrapped in robes of absolute darkness. Its face was hidden behind a mask of polished bone, carved into an expression of eternal calm. Its eyes glowed faintly blue behind the mask. The Reaper. You are the first specimen to reach this chamber in 400 years, the Reaper said. Its voice was like wind through dead leaves, soft and dry and ancient. The last was a soldier who thought he could fight his way to freedom. He failed, but you did not try to fight. You observed, you learned, you adapted. Daniel stood his ground. His heart pounded, but his voice remained steady. I had good teachers. Indeed, the Reaper moved closer, gliding rather than walking. I have studied many species, billions of specimens over 12,000 years, but humans are unique. Your minds are chaos given form, disorder that somehow produces creativity and innovation. I have never encountered anything like you. Is that why you took me, to understand how humans think? Partly, but there is more. The Reaper gestured at the preservation tanks lining the walls. My species is dying. We achieved immortality, but we lost the ability to change. We cannot create new art, new science, new ideas. We can only preserve what already exists. In time, we will fade into nothing. So you steal creativity from others. We study it, we try to understand it, we hope to restore what we have lost. The Reaper's mask tilted slightly. You fascinate me, Daniel Cole. Your neural patterns are the most chaotic I have ever recorded. Your mind makes connections that should be impossible. I will preserve you, copy your consciousness, study it for generations. You should feel honored." Daniel smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Before you do that, I have a question." "You are welcome to ask. I may even choose to answer." "I'll answer." The Reaper froze. The glow behind its mask flickered and died. Its entire body went rigid as if struck by lightning. "How do you know that name?" it whispered. "Your ancestors carved it in stone. They wanted to be remembered." Daniel stepped forward. "The ancient law still binds you. I spoke your true name. Now you must answer truthfully." The Reaper struggled against invisible chains. Daniel could see it fighting, trying to resist the power of its own culture. But the law was older than the Reaper itself. It could not be broken. "Ask your question," the Reaper said. The word seemed to cause it physical pain. "How do I destroy this facility?" Silence stretched between them. Then the Reaper answered. "The facility is powered by a quantum core that requires absolute stability. Any significant disruption to the core's containment field will cause a cascade failure. The asteroid will collapse into itself within minutes. Everything inside will be destroyed." "Where is the containment field generator?" "The central chamber, below this archive. But it is guarded by my most loyal servants. No specimen has ever reached it." Daniel backed toward the archive entrance. "Thank you for your honesty." "You cannot escape," the Reaper said. "Even if you destroy this place, you have no ship. You will die with the rest of us." "Maybe, but you will die knowing that a human defeated you, that your 12,000 years of stolen knowledge and preserved specimens will vanish because one man refused to give up." Daniel paused at the entrance. "That seems like a fair trade to me." He ran. Alarms filled the facility as the Reaper's voice echoed through every corridor. The Silent Ones mobilized, abandoning their schedules and patterns for the first time in. They hunted for Daniel with desperate efficiency. But Daniel was not alone anymore. Word spread through the prison cells as captive whispered to captive. The human was loose. The human knew a way out. Hope flickered in eyes that had forgotten what hope felt like. Far above the asteroid, Captain Laura Bishop's voice crackled through the facility's communication system. Had managed to hack into the network from the Northern Star. The rescue fleet had arrived. "All prisoners," Laura announced, "follow the human. He knows the way out." Daniel reached his cell and freed. Together, they opened every door they could find. Prisoners poured into the corridors, and in beings from a dozen other species. Some were too weak to walk, others carried them. The Silent Ones tried to stop the flood of escaping prisoners, but they were creatures of order facing chaos. They could not adapt fast enough. Their rigid formations shattered against prisoners who attacked from every direction, who used the confusion as a weapon. Daniel led the way toward the central chamber. The generator was close. He could feel power humming through the walls. Behind him, the Reaper followed. Its mask was gone now, revealing a face like carved stone, ancient and terrible. Its eyes burned with fury. "You cannot do this," it shouted. "You will destroy everything. Thousands of years of knowledge, priceless specimens from extinct civilizations, history beyond measure." Daniel did not slow down. "You stole all of it, every specimen, every piece of knowledge. None of it belongs to you." The central chamber appeared ahead. Massive doors blocked the entrance, sealed with symbols that glowed with power. Stepped forward. "I can open it. My people created these symbols before they were born. We forgot their meaning, but I still remember the patterns." He placed his hands on the doors and began to chant. The symbols flickered and faded. The doors slid open. Daniel looked at, "Come with me." Shook his head. "I will hold them here, buy you time. This is my purpose, Daniel Cole. This is why I survived 9 years in this place." He smiled, the first smile Daniel had seen on his face. "Tell the galaxy what happened here. Tell them I helped save them." Daniel wanted to argue, but was already turning toward the approaching Silent Ones. The Old stood in the doorway, blocking the path with his body. "Go," said, "finish it." Daniel ran into the central chamber. Behind him, he heard's final battle begin. The quantum core blazed with blue-white light, suspended in a containment field that hummed with impossible energy. Control panels surrounded it, covered in symbols Daniel could not read. He did not need to read them, he just needed to break them. Daniel Cole raised a piece of metal debris over his head and brought it down on the primary control panel. Sparks flew, alarms screamed, the containment field flickered, and the cascade began. The facility screamed. Metal twisted and stone cracked as the quantum core destabilized. Blue-white energy pulsed through the walls, each pulse bringing the asteroid closer to total collapse. Daniel had minutes at most. He ran. The corridors were chaos now. Prisoners fled in every direction, following escape routes they had never known existed. The Silent Ones tried to restore order, but order was impossible. Their perfect world was falling apart around them. Daniel found an escape pod bay near the outer edge of the facility. Dozens of pods lined the walls, small vessels designed for emergency evacuation. Prisoners crowded around them, fighting to board, screaming in languages Daniel did not understand. He grabbed the nearest prisoner, a young female, and pointed at the pods. "Help them board. One species per pod if possible. Go." The nodded and began organizing the evacuation. Others followed her lead. In crisis, people looked for direction. Daniel provided it without thinking. He could have taken a pod for himself. He could have escaped and let others manage on their own. But there were still prisoners trapped in the lower levels, too weak or too lost to find their way out. Daniel turned and ran back into the dying facility. The Reaper found him near the archive entrance. The ancient being stood amid falling debris, its robes torn, its face twisted with rage. "You have destroyed everything," the Reaper said. 12,000 years, countless lives, knowledge beyond measure, all gone because of one human. Daniel faced the creature that had stolen him from his ship, his crew, his life. "You did this to yourself. You took what did not belong to you. You treated living beings as specimens to study and discard. This is the consequence. I was trying to save my species. By murdering others, by stealing their children, their scientists, their loved ones." Daniel shook his head. "Your species died 12,000 years ago. You just refused to accept it." The Reaper moved toward him, fast despite its ancient body. But the facility lurched violently, throwing them both against the walls. The cascade was accelerating. "Come with me," Daniel said. The Reaper stared at him. "What?" "Come with me, escape. Face justice for what you have done. The galaxy deserves to know the truth about the—" Daniel extended his hand. "Or stay here and die with your stolen treasures, your choice." For a long moment the Reaper did not move. Then it laughed, a dry sound like crumbling paper. "You would offer mercy to me, after everything I have done. Mercy is what separates us from you. It is what makes humans human." The Reaper looked at Daniel's outstretched hand. Then it looked at the collapsing facility around them. Finally, it stepped backward into the shadows. "I have lived for 12,000 years, it said. "I have seen civilizations rise and fall. I have collected the greatest treasures of 100 species, but I have never understood humans. Your chaos, your compassion, your stubborn refusal to accept defeat." Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. "Perhaps that is why I could never capture what you have. It cannot be captured. It can only be lived." The ceiling collapsed between them, cutting off Daniel's view of the Reaper. He did not know if the ancient being escaped or chose to die with its collection. He did not have time to find out. Daniel found the last group of prisoners near the lower levels. They were weak, barely able to walk, but they moved when he told them to move. He carried the weakest on his back. He dragged the slowest by their arms. He refused to leave anyone behind. The escape pod bay was nearly empty when he arrived. Only one pod remained, barely large enough for the survivors he had gathered. Daniel helped them board, counting heads, making sure everyone fit. One seat remained, his seat. But there was someone else in the corridor. A silent one, young by the standards of its species, watching Daniel with those black eyes. It made no move to attack. It simply stood there, lost and confused, its world crumbling around it. Daniel made a decision. "Get in," he said, gesturing at the pod. The silent one did not understand his words, but it understood the gesture. It hesitated, then moved toward the pod. The other survivors protested. This creature had been their captor, their tormentor, one of the beings that had stolen their freedom. But Daniel silenced them with a look. "We are not them," he said. "We do not leave anyone to die." The silent one boarded the pod. Daniel squeezed into the remaining space. The doors sealed. The pod launched into space just as the facility finally collapsed. Daniel watched through the small window as the asteroid folded in on itself. Blue-white light blazed, then faded. Where the facility had stood for, There was only empty space. The Northern Star found his pod an hour later. Captain Laura Bishop met him at the airlock, her eyes red from exhaustion and relief. "You survived," she said. "I had good motivation." The rescue operation took days. Ships from a dozen species arrived to collect survivors and search for more escape pods. Commander's daughter was not among the rescued, but he found records in the recovered data that told him what had happened to her. After 30 years, he finally had closure. The galaxy learned what they had done. Governments that had the Harvester's existence were forced to acknowledge the truth. New laws were passed, new protections created. No species would be taken in silence again. Daniel Cole returned to Earth 3 months later. He was offered medals, promotions, a place in the history books. He refused them all. He just wanted to go back to work. Captain Bishop found him in the cargo hold of the Northern Star, organizing supplies for their next mission. "You could be famous," she said. "You could be rich. Why are you here?" Daniel looked at her. "Because this is where I belong, moving cargo, helping people, doing the job that needs to be done." He smiled slightly. "Fame and fortune are nice, but they do not define who I am." "And who are you?" "Human." Laura nodded slowly. "The galaxy learned a lot about humans because of you." "They learned one thing," Daniel replied. "The only thing that matters." "What is that?" Daniel thought of the cell wall covered in scratched names. He thought of sacrifice and the silent one he had saved. He thought of the Reaper standing in the shadows, unable to understand mercy even at the end. "You can cage a human," he said. "You can study us, test us, try to understand our chaotic minds, but you cannot break us, and if you try, we will find your weakness. We will learn your name, and names have power." Laura stared at him for a long moment, then she nodded. "Welcome back, Daniel." "Good to be back, Captain." The Northern Star departed Earth orbit and headed toward the stars. The galaxy stretched before them, vast and mysterious and full of dangers, but dangers could be faced. Problems could be solved. The darkness could be pushed back, one mission at a time. And somewhere in that darkness, other species whispered stories about the human who had brought down the Reaper. They spoke of his determination, his compassion, his refusal to surrender. They warned each other never to underestimate humanity. Because humans were unpredictable, humans were dangerous, humans were capable of mercy even toward their enemies. And that made them the most terrifying species in the galaxy.